Let me ask you something that should be keeping you up at night. While every major financial institution on the planet, BlackRock, Franklin Templeton, JP Morgan, is racing to tokenize real-world assets, and while the XRP ledger has been quietly positioned as the settlement rail underneath all of it, why is nobody connecting the dots between a $4 trillion tokenization wave and what it means for XRP's price? The answer isn't complicated, it's intentional. The institutions building on top of this infrastructure have every reason to keep retail investors confused, distracted, and focused on the wrong numbers. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what they see that you don't. And I promise you, once you understand the structural reality, the $2 price tag stops being frustrating and starts being the opportunity of a generation. Let's get into it. Welcome back. I'm the Plan XRP admin, and this channel exists for one reason: to cut through the noise and show you the architecture behind the asset. No hype, no hopium, just data, logic, and the cold structural reality of what's being built. Today we're going deep on the real-world asset tokenization wave, and why it doesn't just support XRP's thesis. It mathematically demands a repricing. Let's start with the hard truth that most of the XRP community is missing entirely. You've been told tokenization is good for XRP, you've seen the headlines, you've nodded along, but here's what nobody is actually explaining. Tokenization isn't just a use case for the XRP ledger, it is the mechanism by which XRP becomes structurally irreplaceable in global finance. Here's what I mean. When BlackRock tokenizes a treasury fund, and they have, to the tune of $2.5 billion already through their BUIDL fund, what they're creating is a digital representation of a real asset that needs to settle, transfer, and reconcile in real time, across borders, between counterparties who don't share a banking relationship. Ask yourself this brutal question. What settles that transfer instantly, without a correspondent bank, without a 2-day clearing window, and without the systemic risk of a nostro-vostro intermediary sitting in the middle holding $27 trillion in idle capital? The answer isn't SWIFT. SWIFT is a 1970s messaging system. The answer isn't Ethereum. Its gas fees and settlement times make it economically irrational for institutional-scale transfers. The answer is a ledger built specifically for the movement of value at institutional speed, with native support for tokenized assets, automatic market makers, and a settlement finality measured in 3 to 5 seconds. That ledger is the XRP ledger, and the asset that provides the bridge liquidity within it is XRP. This is the concept most retail investors are missing. XRP doesn't just benefit from tokenization, it is the liquidity engine underneath it. Every tokenized treasury bond, every tokenized real estate position, every tokenized carbon credit that needs to cross a border or change hands between institutions requires a bridge. That bridge needs liquidity. And that liquidity, at institutional scale, comes through XRP. Think of it this way: tokenization is the cargo. The XRP ledger is the highway. XRP is the fuel. And right now, in early 2026, the cargo volume is accelerating faster than almost anyone in retail finance is tracking. While you're watching Bitcoin candles, a $4 trillion wave of real-world assets is being loaded onto a highway that runs on XRP. Now let's do the math that the crowd is ignoring. According to data from Boston Consulting Group and Ripple's own tokenization reports, the tokenized real-world asset market is projected to reach $4 trillion by 2030. Some estimates from firms like Citi and McKinsey push that number to $16 trillion within the decade. Let's use the conservative figure: $4 trillion. Now here's where the math gets uncomfortable for anyone who thinks XRP stays at $2. If even 10% of that $4 trillion in tokenized asset volume flows through the XRP ledger annually, and given Ripple's existing institutional relationships and native AMM functionality, 10% is actually a modest assumption. That's $400 billion in annual settlement demand flowing through the ledger. Now factor in the existing cross-border payment flows that ODL, on-demand liquidity, is already processing. Factor in the foreign exchange bridging demand at $7.5 trillion daily. Factor in the derivatives settlement requirements that exceed 1.2 quadrillion in notional value globally. Here's the number that matters. With approximately 55 billion XRP in active circulation, and each token needing to represent a meaningful unit of that settlement throughput, the math doesn't support a $2 token. It doesn't support a $200 token. The architectural requirement pushes the value of each XRP dramatically higher, just to maintain liquidity efficiency at scale. Let me make that concrete. To move $400 billion in tokenized assets annually with XRP priced at $2, you need 200 billion tokens in constant circulation, more than the entire fixed supply of XRP in existence. It's physically impossible. At $500 per XRP, that same $400 billion requires 800 million tokens. At $5,000, it requires 80 million. The higher the price, the more efficient the bridge, the less market disturbance per transaction, the more stable the system. This is not speculation. This is not a Moonboy price target. This is a structural requirement imposed by the mathematics of liquidity efficiency. David Schwartz didn't design the XRP ledger for $2. He designed it for a world where the asset price reflects the value of the commerce moving through it. That world is being built right now, one tokenized asset at a time, and the math is not on the side of patience for those who haven't accumulated yet. Now let's talk about what the smart money is actually doing, because actions always speak louder than price charts. Franklin Templeton has moved its $380 million money market fund onto a public blockchain, not Ethereum, not Solana. Their operations are increasingly intersecting with the XRP ledger's tokenization infrastructure. BlackRock's BWIDL tokenized fund crossed $2.5 billion in assets under management faster than any fund launch in history. These institutions don't build on infrastructure they don't believe in at scale. And then there's Ripple itself. The acquisition of Hidden Road, a prime brokerage that clears over $3 trillion in transactions annually across 300 institutional clients, wasn't a speculative bet. It was Ripple buying the institutional on-ramp for everything that comes next. When the tokenized asset market scales, Hidden Road's clients don't need to change their workflows. They're already connected to the infrastructure. Ask yourself the question institutions ask before committing capital at this scale. Does a firm like Franklin Templeton move $380 million onto a public ledger without legal certainty, without settlement finality guarantees, and without understanding what the bridge liquidity asset is? Absolutely not. They don't gamble. They position. And positioning at this level is a multi-year decision, not a quarterly trade. Meanwhile, on-chain data is telling the same story from a different angle. Exchange reserves for XRP have been trending toward multi-year lows. Tokens are leaving centralized exchanges and moving into custody and cold storage. That's not retail accumulation. Retail doesn't move tokens off exchanges at this scale. That's institutional positioning, acquiring supply before the repricing, not after. And here's the signal most retail participants aren't calibrated to read. Central bank digital currency pilots in jurisdictions like UAE, Singapore, and Brazil have all incorporated cross-ledger settlement testing. The XRP ledger's interoperability layer is not an accident. It was built specifically to interface with CBDC infrastructure. The central banks don't announce what they're testing. They test quietly and position quietly. But the on-chain footprints don't lie. The institutional signal in early 2026 has never been clearer. The only question is whether you're looking at the right data or watching Bitcoin headlines. So when does this actually trigger? Let me give you the specific catalysts to watch in 2026. First, the Digital Asset Clarity Act. This legislation is in its final legislative stages with bipartisan support. The moment it passes, XRP receives definitive classification as a non-security commodity for settlement purposes. That single event removes the final institutional hesitation blocking large-scale deployment. Firms with compliance mandates cannot deploy capital at scale into an asset with unresolved legal classification. Clarity Act passage flips that switch permanently. Second, tokenized asset ETF structures. The SEC's posture on tokenized fund vehicles is shifting in real time. When the first tokenized real-world asset ETF that routes settlement through the XRP ledger receives approval, the institutional on-ramp goes from narrow to wide open overnight. Third, the hidden road integration completing its full operational rollout. When Ripple's prime brokerage infrastructure is fully live for its 300 institutional clients, XRP-backed liquidity becomes a standard operational tool rather than an experimental option. Each of these catalysts independently would be significant. Together, and all three are converging within the same 12 to 18-month window, they represent a structural trigger unlike anything this asset has seen since its creation. The window is not closing today, but it is measurably narrower than it was 6 months ago. And once these catalysts fire, the accumulation phase ends. The repricing phase begins. Those are two very different environments to be operating in. Here's the scarcity reality that doesn't get discussed enough. There will never be more than 100 billion XRP. That supply is algorithmically fixed and cryptographically enforced. You cannot lobby for more. You cannot print more through quantitative easing. You cannot dilute it. Now, place that fixed supply against the trajectory I've just described. A $4 trillion tokenized asset market, a $150 trillion annual cross-border payment flow, a $7.5 trillion daily foreign exchange market, derivatives exposure exceeding 1.2 quadrillion. The math creates a collision. Finite supply, expanding demand, rising institutional lockup, accelerating exchange reserve drain. This is the equation that central banks and sovereign wealth funds have already solved. They understand that to function as a reserve bridge asset at global scale, each XRP token must carry enormous transactional weight. That weight has a dollar equivalent, and that equivalent is not $2. The cruelest irony for those who wait too long is this: the repricing event won't be gradual. The accumulation phase is designed to be quiet and measured. The repricing phase, when triggered by regulatory clarity and institutional deployment, will not be. By the time the signal is obvious to every retail participant on social media, the supply at accessible prices will already be structurally spoken for. The window is open. It is not open indefinitely. Let me leave you with the framework that changes how you see this entire space. Bitcoin is a narrative. Its price is a function of collective belief, amplified by stablecoin liquidity and retail emotion cycles. That's not a critique, it's a structural description. XRP is infrastructure. Its eventual price is a function of the mathematical requirements of global commerce. Those are not the same thing. One is a story you can walk away from. The other is a physical law you cannot override. The $4 trillion tokenization wave is not coming. It has already started. The institutions are already positioned. The infrastructure is already operational. The regulatory clarity is in its final approach. What remains is the repricing, and those who understand the architecture will not be surprised when it arrives. Stay patient, stay rational, and as always, we don't wait for the future. We plan for it. Comment Ledger below if you made it to the end. I want to know who's actually paying attention. I'm the Plan XRP admin. The math doesn't lie, and the bridge is almost complete.